Nick Bryant, welcome back to the show.
Glad to be here, Shawn.
The first episode we did was fire. Took off like a bat out of hell. And so now you're back. And
Take two.
Yeah, here we go. So we're going to kick it off with P. Diddy. What the hell? And then you have a lot of updates on the Epstein stuff.
Yeah.
I have some questions as well. And then you got a new book out. When did the book come out? The Truth About Watergate.
Came out in March.
It came out in March?
Yeah.
How's it doing?
It's doing pretty good. I'm pretty happy with it. The narrative is completely antithetical to the narrative that we hear in the mainstream media. But I fortified it with 2,238 citations. So no one can tell me that I made any of this up.
Yeah. Well, hey, so we'll get to it. But first, last time I think we went through the entire interview and I forgot to give you your gift.
Yeah, I was a little bummed out about that when I realized.
Sorry. So I'm going to make it up to you right now.
Well, thank you.
Here we go. You got any guesses?
Thank you very much.
You have to open it on the show. That's the only rule.
I would say it's gummies.
Good guess after you open the bag up.
What do you know? It's gummies.
Vigilance League gummy bears, made right here in the USA, up in Michigan actually, and they're legal in all 50 states, which we just had a great conversation about sobriety. So
Yeah.
so they fit. It's just candy. But well, Nick, I know you don't need an introduction on this show, but I'm going to give you one anyways. Here we go. You are a journalist and author who wrote several books, including The Franklin Scandal and your most recent book, The Truth About Watergate. With over a 30-year writing career, you've focused most of your work on the plight of lower socioeconomic children in the United States. You've spent 7 years investigating coast-to-coast child trafficking networks. You are an investigator of the Epstein network and published Epstein's Little Black Book. You launched a nonprofit organization, Epstein Justice, where the objective is to hold the government and perpetrators in the Epstein child trafficking network accountable. You were on the show last year, but you're back today to discuss the inside scoop on P. Diddy's case, as well as the connection between the cover-up of the Epstein child trafficking network and P. Diddy. I can't wait to get into this. It feels weird even saying I can't wait to get into this. It's so disgusting. But yeah, I got some questions about Epstein as well when we get to that point here. But Nick, we have a subscription account. It's on Patreon. I think you have a Patreon too,
Yes,
correct?
I do have a Patreon.
So one of the things that we give our patrons is we give them the opportunity to ask a question to each guest. And so, you know, it's Patreon. Our patrons are our top supporters. I wouldn't be here. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't be here if it wasn't for them. They've been here since the beginning. And so I just love to offer them this opportunity. So this is from Tyler Stutt. Despite significant evidence, figures such as Sarah Kellen have not faced the same level of prosecution as Ghislaine Maxwell. I can never pronounce her. Ghislaine. Yeah. I'm sorry.
It's a tough one.
Yeah. I mean, I just hate to butcher her name. But what systemic issues in the legal system prevent these individuals from being held accountable, and what reforms do you believe are necessary to address this? So one, I have a question. Who the hell is Sarah Kellen?
Sarah Kellen was one of Epstein's procurers, a.k.a.
Okay.
pimps. And actually, the New York Times did an article on 6 Epstein procurers, a.k.a. pimps. And Maxwell was the leading one, but right below her was Epstein's number 2 lieutenant, Sarah Kellen. And this woman has led a lot of lambs to the slaughter. she should be serving multiple lifetimes for child trafficking. Child trafficking is 15 to life. And Maxwell only getting 20, considering that she's been probably trafficking for 25 years, is a joke. But with Kellen, she should also be in prison with Maxwell. And again, as we've talked about it last time, we'll talk about it this time, the government has been completely unwilling to prosecute the procurers and the perpetrators in the Jeffrey Epstein network.
Well, it sounds like I know we're going to get into this, but it sounds like, what did you say her name?
Sarah Kellen.
The other one.
Ghislaine Maxwell.
Yeah, Ghislaine. Sounds like she's got a pretty cush prison sentence.
Well, she's in a dormitory now, and generally people that are in dormitories, prison dormitories, they've been exemplary prisoners. They've done a lot of time, and they're getting ready to get released. And Maxwell got into a dormitory after like 2 years, so obviously she's been given very cush circumstances.
Why do you think the media is so hesitant to cover this shit?
I can speak from my own experience.
Well, not hesitant. They just won't cover it.
They won't cover it. The media...
Are they pro sex trafficking? Is that what it is? They like child sex trafficking?
Well, the media will talk about things that are salacious. Anything that's salacious with Epstein, the media will talk about. But when you try to get into justice, the media won't go there at all. In January, I was contacted by CNN. There was going to be a big Epstein document dump. And I was contacted by CNN. And because I was the guy that put the black book on the internet, they wanted me to take part. And I talked to the producer, and then we were texting. I said, I'd also like to talk about Epstein Justice. It's this organization I've started where we're trying to get justice for Jeffrey Epstein's victims. And then I got a text about, 20 minutes later, well, Nick, we're going to go a different direction.
Really?
Yeah. And that's happened to me.
So the mainstream media, they don't want any justice for these victims.
No. I mean, it's so bizarre to me that you've got the mainstream media out there and none of them are screaming for justice. Jeffrey Epstein trafficked underage girls for 25 years.
What is the youngest girl on record that he trafficked?
Okay, so on record, it's 13. The cover story is 14, but there were girls younger than actually 13.
Shit.
And I know a therapist. She's an eminent therapist. Over the years, I've been researching and writing about child trafficking for 22 years. And the National Center on Sexual Exploitation puts on an international summit. And I've spoken at the summit 3 times. And the International Society for the Study of Trauma and Dissociation, which is a group of therapists that work with victims that have been abused, gone through horrific abuse. I've spoken at their international conference. So when it comes to people in the anti-trafficking community and also people that work with victims of trafficking, I've got a pretty good name. And I've befriended a couple of them that have told me that, and one of them is really an eminent psychologist. I can't, because of our confidentiality, I can't. But people would know her. And she had a victim. She was counseling someone who she felt was under 10 years old when she was trafficked by Epstein. And then I know another therapist who's an esteemed therapist, very esteemed therapist, who has another client that was under 10 years old when they were trafficked by Epstein. Now, and these kids can describe Epstein's home. They can describe parks that they were taken to by his home in New York. They know, and these 2 therapists firmly believe, now they're young women, that they're telling the truth. And the thing is, when I wrote the Franklin scandal, King and Spence, the 2 primary pimps in that network, they were into like adolescent boys. But these guys are psychopaths. Epstein's a psychopath. Maxwell's a psychopath. If you want an 8-year-old, they'll get you an 8-year-old. I mean, that's just the way it is. I mean, it's not like they're constricted by any type of morality.
I mean, so how would they? I think we talked about how they got the other victims that were 16, 17. You know, how are they capturing 8-year-olds?
They were
just
buying
kidnapping them.
Well, they were buying them in Eastern Europe. They were actually buying children. Epstein and Jean-Luc Brunel were buying children in Eastern Europe. And what I've seen, like in the Franklin scandal, Boys Town was being plundered by Lawrence King, one of the pedophilic pimps. And the number 2 guy at Boys Town at that point, his name was Father James Kelly. I hate to call him father, but his name was James Kelly. And he'd molested a number of kids in upstate New York. And the Catholic Church, in its infinite wisdom, put him at Boys Town. And I was told by every year the students of Boys Town are like the mayor. Boys Town is like an incorporated city. And I was told by a former mayor of Boys Town that he felt that Father Kelly was compromised and that's how these kids were able to get passes for the weekend. Because, it's kind of, I was just looking, when I was looking at Boys Town, I was just looking for kids that had been trafficked by Lawrence King. But then I encountered like 6 kids that had been molested by James Kelly. So it's shocking. The Catholic Church knew what he was about in upstate New York, and then they moved him to Boys Town.
They have a history of this, though, don't
they?
Oh,
yeah. The Catholic Church moves the priests. I mean, that's why they're getting sued into oblivion now, is because they were fully cognizant of the behavior of these priests, and then they would move them to a different parish.
They just picked up a Catholic priest here in Franklin for doing that. I don't know if they charged him or if he got a guilty verdict, but yeah, they did. It was, I don't know, maybe, actually, I think it was right before last Christmas when it came out. No, it was right after. Yeah.
The Catholic Church is, you would think, would come to the point where it would be transparent. And whatever happened, happened. You would think it would be a spiritual organization. And I know people that are Catholic that are very spiritual.
I was Catholic.
Yeah. and you're very spiritual. But I think when institutions, when something becomes an institution, and we've seen this a lot, institutions become concerned about their power, their money, and their prestige. Yeah. And they put that above, like Penn State is an example. They knew that, the Penn State people knew that Jerry Sandusky was molesting those kids, but it was concerned about its power, money, and prestige. The Catholic Church, money, power, prestige. The Boy Scouts, money, power, prestige. That's just, institutions become that way. Institutions like the Boy Scouts, I believe, started out with the purest of motives. But then at a certain point, it became concerned about its money, power, and prestige. And it knew about a bunch of these. It had a big list of scoutmasters that had molested kids.
You know, going back to I just have some questions before we really dive into the interview. And you know, I just don't understand why they're not going after him. And is everybody guilty? I mean, like, why did everybody have a hand in this? Like, why is nothing happening? The judge almost got assassinated. What is going on? What are those paintings of George Bush throwing airplanes at 2 Jenga towers at Epstein Island? What is the painting with Bill Clinton wearing a dress and red high heels? What is that? Is that Is that a I gotcha? You better not say anything, ever? I want to introduce you to a company called Bunker. Bunker is an app developed by American patriots with over 30 years in information security. Bunker is designed to help protect you and your family from cyber threats, including criminals, big tech, and government surveillance. With Bunker, you get secure messaging, free from surveillance. Bunker connects you with only trusted contacts who can reach you. You also get secure file storage by storing crucial documents like mortgages or family photos securely with the option to scan physical documents directly into the app. And you also have a password manager to help manage your login credentials safely. Bunker's tools help prevent identity theft, financial loss, and more. It even works without Wi-Fi or cellular service. Bunker believes that everyone should be able to communicate in private and have access to bank-level security in their daily lives. For that reason, they are even offering family and friends you invite to sign up for free for a limited time. Download Bunker now from the App Store, Play Store, or visit their website, bunker.life. That's Bunker, BUNKR.life. Use offer code SRS for 25% off, making it less than $1 a month. Download Bunker today. Listen up. No matter who wins the election, I'm still buying gold and silver. We're $35 trillion in debt, and we have a government that none of us trust. So try to protect your money while you still can. Go to ShawnLikesGold.com. You'll learn about the top-rated precious metals company, Goldco, and how they can help you. They're a great company, top-rated, over 6,000 five-star reviews, and tons of awards. And they support the show. And for my listeners, you can get up to a 10% instant match in bonus silver on qualified orders. So if you're worried about your money losing value, or you just want to buy some precious metals that you can physically hold on to, something that is real, that's been around for thousands of years, Goldco can help. So go to ShawnLikesGold.com. That's ShawnLikesGold.com. Performance may vary. Consult with your tax attorney or financial professional before making an investment decision. There's a lot of symbolism in those.
It's definitely entirely possible. Epstein had a very warped mind. But despite that, he pandered to other people with warped minds. And perhaps he had insights. I believe Epstein was intelligence, for sure. And he was in a very high strata of intelligence. And when Clinton was president, Epstein was providing him with women. He was signing into the White House and providing him with women. I don't think that they were minors, but they were definitely young women. So even when even when Clinton's the president, Epstein is delivering women to him in the White House. So someone like that has a lot of dirt on a lot of people, knows a lot.
Yeah. So what, is he holding the entire U.S. government on blackmail?
Well, obviously not anymore. The thing with Epstein, and this is where people don't really understand. Jeffrey Epstein by himself couldn't blackmail anyone. Jeffrey Epstein was a college dropout from Coney Island, kind of a working class family. A guy like that couldn't blackmail the most powerful men in the United States and the world. He has to have an organization behind him. And that organization tells people, if you harm Jeffrey Epstein, there's going to be retribution. That's the only way that Jeffrey Epstein can blackmail some of the most powerful men in the world, is if there's an organization behind him that has a lot of power.
What organization was behind him?
There's some dark corner of intelligence that's been doing this forever. And I don't know what you'd call it. Some people would call it the deep state. I don't know. I'd call it some dark, malignant corner of intelligence. And that dark corner has been doing nefarious things for a long time. And I understand some of the reasons. I knew someone that knew William Colby very well. He was a former CI director that went canoeing in April. He was 76 years old. He went canoeing in April without his shoes, and his body was found, I think, like a week later. So he died under very suspicious circumstances. But he had told this individual that I know that was one of his regrets, because Colby had been with the CIA from the very beginning. He was OSS and then CIA. He said that was one of his regrets, is that they felt like fighting communists was too important to be left to politicians. So they started funding mechanisms, covert funding mechanisms, and then also the blackmail too. And he said that was one of his big regrets, was that the CIA started these covert funding mechanisms, so it could basically do whatever it wanted.
Interesting. Do you think, I have another, I'm going to switch the flow of the interview. Let's just get into the Epstein stuff right now, since we're in it. But, do you think that, I got to be careful how I say this, but basically what I'm saying, fuck it, I'm not going to try to beat around the bush. Do you think that all of the clients were pedophiles, or did they get tricked? Do you think that is what was going on? Because wouldn't that, yeah, I get it. They're cheating on their wives. It's bad, but they didn't knowingly. Do you see what I'm getting at? They didn't know. I mean, look, Nick, you can get on Instagram right now and look at all the private, what do they call, the private jet stewardesses, and they all look the same. If you see, you know what I'm talking about.
I don't. No.
Well,
I'm not much of an Instagram guy, so.
They look like they just walked out of the strip club and jumped on a jet yeah. And so that's what so we know what's going on private jets, okay? I mean, it's pretty obvious what happens with those type of stewardesses. And so it may not even be uncommon. I mean, I don't know. I don't fly around on private jets, but it may not even be uncommon, for that to be, part of the flight routine, right? And so maybe this is just another flight where they're used to this happening, but this time it's, that was a 17-year-old, by the way. You're on camera, because wouldn't that turn them into somewhat of a victim as well?
Well, I think all the above to what you said. I think sometimes they're tricked, but Epstein was frequently pandering 14-year-olds. And we know he was pandering 13-year-olds. And I don't think it would be hard to differentiate between a 13-year-old or 14-year-old and an adult. And as I said earlier, Epstein, I believe, pandered kids that were under 10 years old. So I think it's all the above. Guys could have been tricked, for sure, with some of these young women that look like adults. But then some guys they're pedophiles. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, that's their thing. That's what they're into. And like Epstein, his thing was pubescent girls.
You know what I mean, though? I mean, you definitely have your repeat offenders.
Yeah.
I mean, we all know who they are, at least a couple of them, but there's also people, from my understanding, that were, one-time offenders, or supposedly. And I don't know. I thought a lot about this, and like I said, it's, yes, are they stand-up citizens by flying around in private jets and doing whatever to women that goes on there? No, they're not stand-up citizens, but, I mean, they're not doing anything anybody else isn't doing, and at least it's not uncommon. And so to to trick somebody like that, I think would be relatively easy, especially with a 16, 17-year-old.
With the 16 or 17-year-old, yeah, I think so. I got to a blackmail photographer who was part of the Franklin trafficking network. And I was initially cutting my teeth on the story. I was trying to figure out how, I was trying to figure out so much stuff. And I asked him about the blackmail angle. And he said, to me, it's like you're on a yacht. Mm-hmm. And it's a beautiful yacht. It's a beautiful day. And you can have anything you want on the yacht. But if you decide to get off the yacht, the people on the yacht are going to make sure that you drown. So once you've been compromised, there's almost an incentive to keep going with it. I mean, you're not going to stop. I mean, there's already footage of you. You're part of that club. You're part of that omerta, where you're going to keep your mouth shut and do what you're told.
How many names were in that book? Do you remember?
In the Black Book?
Yeah.
A bunch of them, but not all of them were pedophiles.
Yeah.
But
how many were clients? Estimation.
Probably 50 or 60.
50 or 60?
Yeah. And I could be wrong. There were a number of names that were circled. How the Black Book came into my possession, I can't really get into the definitive machinations, but Alfredo Rodriguez was a house manager for Epstein. And he made copies of the Black Book. And he tried to sell it to one of the attorneys that were representing some of the kids that Epstein molested. And the attorney called the FBI, and the FBI did a sting on him. Mm-hmm. And according to the affidavit of the FBI agent, she said that the ones that were circled were ones that he felt were incriminated. And there were a number of very powerful guys that were circled. And like Bill Clinton wasn't circled, but Epstein had 25 contact numbers for him. And that's another indication, too, with the Black Book is how many contact numbers does Jeffrey Epstein? Like, he only had 2 contact numbers for Mick Jagger. So I doubt that he and Mick did much. Although Mick Jagger is, I think, according to Mackenzie Phillips, he molested her when she was, I think, 12 or something. But I don't think that, although Epstein had a couple of numbers for Jagger, I don't think that he provided Jagger with children. And it's not because I like the Rolling Stones. It's just, with only 2 contact numbers. Now, I haven't really seen anything where they're together. Mm. So, But there's a lot of other people in that book that are circled. And I think that tends to incriminate. I think Alfredo Rodriguez, I mean, he was Epstein's house manager for quite some time. So he knew a lot of what was going on. And then the FBI ultimately impounded the book. And then I got it from some people who got it from the FBI. And it really shows the breadth of his social connections. Now, people have argued that it's kind of funny. Like Mother Jones did an article where some guy called everybody in the Black Book. And no one knew Jeffrey Epstein in the Black Book. I don't know him. Never met him. So see how they run. That cracked me up.
Interesting.
And Mother Jones was actually, that writer was seemingly naive enough to believe that nobody in the Black Book knew Jeffrey Epstein.
Well, let's talk about some of the stuff that has come up since we last spoke.
Well, I've gotten a beat on the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund. And that's really a superlative cover-up tool. There's 225 women have applied for settlements from the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund. And the fund has awarded 150 settlements. 8 women have declined. But if you get a settlement from the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund, you've got to sign an NDA, which says that you will not go after any of your other perpetrators. So it's shutting down.
Meaning?
You can't go after anybody else. You're going to get this settlement.
Anybody that was in that black book is off limits to everybody who's signed.
Yeah. And that the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund was started by Jordana Feldman and then David Boies. And David Boies is a power broker attorney in New York. Well, he's a famous attorney. But David Boies has a very, very dark side. And we don't even know the criteria that they use for awarding settlements. These two therapists who I talked to, they helped their clients apply for the victims' compensation. The therapists who had the clients that were under 10 when they said they were trafficked by Epstein, they were not awarded any kind of settlement, even though one of the kids knew a lot about the inside of Jeffrey Epstein's home. And both therapists who I've talked to felt that they weren't awarded any money because it went against the cover story. The cover story by the mainstream media is that the kids were 14. There wasn't anybody younger than 14. That's the mainstream media. So because it went against the cover story, those clients weren't awarded any money from the victims. And we have no idea, as I said, of the criteria that's used. I mean, it's really random. And some get 6-figure settlements and some get 7-figure settlements. We don't really know. I mean, it's not transparent at all.
And it's this attorney that's in charge of it?
Jordana Feldman and David Boies were the architects of the Victims' Compensation Fund.
Where's the money come from?
Epstein's estate, which has a lot of money. And David Boies has shown that he's not an exemplary paragon of ethics.
How so?
He's quite fond of using Black Cube, the retired Mossad mercenaries. He represented Harvey Weinstein. And Rose McGowan was one of the first actresses that came out and said, she'd been molested by Harvey Weinstein. And David Boies deployed Black Cube against her, and they infiltrated her life under false pretenses and tried to get her to say incriminating things that could be used against her, which she didn't. I mean, she ultimately figured out that these guys were, I don't know if she figured out they were Black Cube, but she ultimately figured out. And then the New York Times was writing an article about Epstein. There were a number of reporters there. And he deployed Black Cube against them, these New York Times reporters, trying to find dirt on them. And at the same time, he was representing the New York Times in a libel suit. I mean, total conflict of interest, but it wasn't even a speed bump. And David Boies, Theranos, Elizabeth Holmes, the charlatan who came up with Theranos and how it was going to be able to take your blood and tell you everything that you needed to know about your life. People started to attack her, and David Boies deployed Black Cube on them, too. He was actually on Theranos' board. So this is the kind of guy that we've got that's overseeing the victims' compensation, the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund.
Wow. When did you find out about Black Cube?
At some point between the last time I was here.
And how would you describe them?
Well, the retired Mossad agents.
Only Mossad agents.
I think they're out of Israel, so they might be other type of Israeli intelligence agents, but definitely retired Mossad. And they do dirty deeds. But they don't do dirty deeds done dirt cheap. They just do dirty deeds, and I think they charge an exorbitant amount for them. And we've got David Boies using Black Cube to protect Harvey Weinstein, and the same guy is one of the architects of the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund, which really shows pretty much right out of the gate that something is seriously awry with the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund.
Yeah, yeah. What? So I mean, how do they operate? How does Black Cube operate? Let's hear a scenario.
It all depends upon it's gathering intelligence on people. Like they went after David Boies deployed Black Cube on these journalists that were writing an article on Harvey Weinstein, and they were just looking for dirt on them that they could use to dissuade them to continue writing that article. And with Rose McGowan, they kind of infiltrated her life as like friends. And I mean, who knows what they were trying to do with her? I mean, probably trying to get her to exonerate Harvey Weinstein, but she never did. I mean, and she's been pretty much banished from Hollywood. Even though a bunch of women came out, she was like one of the first and the most vocal. And Harvey Weinstein had gotten away with that stuff for years.
Yeah, yeah.
I've kind of come to think that Hollywood and Washington, D.C. have a certain kind of person.
Gee, I wonder what leads you to believe that.
But they're both, it's kind of interesting. Both people in Hollywood and D.C., it's a power thing. They have a tremendous amount of power. People in Hollywood have the power to really sculpt Americans' attitudes about a lot of different things. And of course, people in Washington, D.C. have the power to make laws that govern all of us. And Hollywood Babylon, there was a book written by a guy named Kenneth Anger, kind of a nasty piece of work, but he wrote a book called Hollywood Babylon. And someone needs to write a book called Potomac on the Sodom and Gomorrah on the Potomac. I mean, that I think that would be a good book. That might even be one of my next books. I don't know. Sodom and Gomorrah on the Potomac by Nick Bryant.
It'll be a good one.
But with David Boies, he's handled all this litigation. And these women have to sign these NDAs. So the government has worked very hard to cover up Epstein, but it cannot tell these women that they can't sue their perpetrators, these other perpetrators. But if you get money and sign that NDA, that Victims Compensation Fund is doing something that the government can't.
Why do you think that he hasn't employed Black Cube on you?
You know, maybe he has. I'm just kind of too obtuse to know. I mean, I know I've had one death threat, but I might have had others. I'm just too much of I'm too thick-headed to. I'm not inclined towards paranoia. So, who knows what happens? I don't know. If you write the kind of stuff that I write, you cannot really be paranoid. That'd be if I had paranoid inclinations, I'd still be underneath my bed.
What else have you uncovered?
So what's really interesting is when David Boies started taking on these clients, these Epstein victims, he immediately or quickly conscripted a guy named Stan Pottinger, who was an assistant U.S. Attorney General. And I call him the Forrest Gump of cover-ups. If the government needed a cover-up, Stan Pottinger would be there. He covered up Kent State, where the 4 students got shot by National Guardsmen. There was a tape. The Justice Department had a tape of those soldiers being ordered to shoot, but the grand jury that Pottinger oversaw, that tape was never played. And actually, that tape didn't come out till like 2005. So he covered that up. And the FBI had a program called COINTELPRO, in which it completely trampled on the rights of Americans, open mail, and it sent during this period, a letter was sent to Martin Luther King, who was about to get the Nobel Peace Prize. And it had, I think it had like some tapes of King having an affair. And the letter, which I believe was written by William Sullivan, who was like the number 3 guy, told King that he needed to commit suicide before he accepted the Nobel Prize, or these tapes would come out. Coretta King, his wife, was called and told about his affairs. So it was really, COINTELPRO was really nasty, especially like with the American Indian movement and also the Black Panthers. And there's evidence that COINTELPRO definitely contributed to the death of Fred Hampton, who was a Black Panther in Chicago. But there was a member of the American Indian movement named Emory Aquish, and the FBI floated information that she was an informant, and she was murdered by 2 members of the American Indian movement because they thought she was an informant. So the church hearings, which looked into COINTELPRO, found all this stuff out about what had been going on. And they had 20,000 pages of documents, and they'd interviewed a number of FBI agents. And Stan Pottinger was going to come in and he was going to exact justice. And no one got indicted. Not a single person was indicted for COINTELPRO when Stan Pottinger was the Assistant Attorney General. And Richard Helms, the CIA had a program called Operation Chaos, where they were also doing domestic spying. And Stan Pottinger was going to exact justice with that. And Richard Helms testified before Congress that that no Americans had been spied on, and then the church hearings found out that a lot of Americans had been spied on, and their mail had been opened and other things. And Stan Pottinger was going to get to the bottom of that. And Richard Helms was charged with 2 misdemeanors and had to pay $2,000. And it's kind of interesting. Stan Pottinger he went out with Gloria Steinem for 9 years. Now, she was a CIA asset also. The founder of the Americans or Women's Liberation. I mean, Steinem was getting money from the CIA. Now, she said that she was getting money in 59 through 61. But I found an article in a feminist magazine out of San Francisco that she was getting money from the CIA for the majority of the 60s. So her and Stan Pottinger were a couple. And CIA assets in love, what a wonderful story. But when Stan Pottinger left the Department of Justice, then he became an outright criminal. There was the October surprise, where the Iranians had taken a number of hostages. And Carter was trying to get the hostages back, and it was really making Carter look weak. And some people from the Reagan campaign went to the Iranians and said, if you hold those hostages until Reagan is elected, we'll sell arms to you very cheaply. It was Iran-Contra. And Pottinger was in on according to the president of Iran, Pottinger was in on the ground floor negotiations of Iran-Contra. And then, now this is kind of amazing. He is caught on tape instructing these Iranians how to best smuggle arms from the U.S. to Iran. I mean, they got him. He's on tape talking to these two Iranians about it. And lo and behold, the Department of Justice loses the tape. And that paragon of integrity, Rudolph Giuliani, was overseeing the case. So and that's treasonous. I mean, to facilitate arms sale to an enemy. I mean, that's outright treason, but Pottinger walked. So here is the guy that David Boies conscripted to help with all this litigation. And it's very obvious that Pottinger has had a background in intelligence. And Epstein was an intelligence op. So essentially what you've got with Pottinger is you've got an intelligence op being covered up by an intelligence op.
Wow. How do you find this stuff out? Where do you go digging for this?
I just, it just kind of comes to me. I don't know. It's interesting. When you're investigating something and you know what the truth is, or you have a kind of an approximation of the truth, you can generally find stuff that's going to corroborate it. If you're actually onto the truth. And that's what I've done for my entire career, is felt where I felt like I was onto the truth, then the information just follows. I mean, you got to dig.
Do you have a lot of people coming to you as well?
I do.
I mean, you've been out there now for a while.
I do. I mean, some of them are, need some psychiatric help.
I was wondering, how do you decipher through that?
It's tough because some of this stuff is way out there. And although people are describing something that's way out there, sometimes you never know.
We've seen lots of things that are way out there in the past 4 years.
That's true. And
I mean, I never thought I'd be talking about UFOs and aliens and shit, I'll tell you that much. Here we are.
With, it's kind of interesting. There was a point where I can remember the Franklin scandal got published in 2009, 2010, and I'd put everything I had into it. I put all the chips on the Franklin scandal. And my girlfriend of 5 years had left me, and I had a beautiful one-bedroom in the Village, and the price got amped, and I could no longer afford it because I'm one of those guys with life. I'm not really a gambler. Like I'll gamble $100 over the course of an NFL season, but I'll certainly gamble my career. And when the Franklin scandal got published, I had about a year's worth of money, and I thought I can get something done in a year. And I had a lot of friends that were in the media in New York. Only one guy tried to help me. The rest shunned me. I went to L.A. and tried to sell it, and I came really close, but I wasn't able to sell it. So at the end of that year, I found myself, I'm not a plan B kind of guy. I moved to New York City with like, I don't know, 15 or 20 grand. And I started I'm from Minneapolis. I had a lot of stuff published in Minneapolis. So by the time I got to New York, I had a pretty good portfolio. And I moved into this studio apartment that I called The Cave because it had no light. It had windows, but then there was a wall right next to the windows. So, I had to open the door and look outside to see, if it was raining or sunny or whatever. So I was living in The Cave, and my rent was like $750 or something like that. And I thought to myself, should I get a part-time job or should I just go for it? And I just said, well, I'm just going to go for it. So I just started, and this is before the internet with email and stuff like that. So I just started, I had little packets that I'd put together, my clips, and then in priority mail, and I'd send them out. And I didn't have a plan B. If that didn't work out, I mean, I was going to end up in the park. So there was a strong incentive for me to make that work out. And I had a pretty good job in academia that I just kind of walked away from. Well, I mean, it was kind of mutual, I think. That was very secure, but I'd reached a point where I just wasn't compatible with it. So the plan A there was, move to New York, and if I didn't succeed, I didn't have a plan B. So when the Franklin scandal was published, I just thought I'm going to make plan A work, and because I'm not a plan B kind of guy, but plan A did not work, and I found myself living in a hovel in Brooklyn.
Wow.
And now I don't have anything against Brooklyn, but I was there for about a year, and that was kind of a hard time because I had to kind of restart my career.
Gotcha.
And one of my friends who was kind of a big shot at a network, he was the only one that apologized to me. I said, Nick, I'm really sorry. I could have been a better friend to you when you went through all those difficulties.
Yeah.
So one of my friends in the media, that's it. Said, I'm sorry that I banished you from my life.
Man. Well, I hope you stay hot on the Epstein trail. One more question before we kind of move on to P. Diddy. Do you think Epstein killed himself?
In the Franklin scandal, there were two primary pimps. There was Lawrence E. King, and he kept his mouth shut, did 10 years, and then he had a no-show job waiting for him at a BMW dealership in Alexandria, Virginia. And then there was Craig Spence, who was really the blackmail side of things. And the thing about Epstein and Spence, there was so much media on Epstein that he could not be a blackmail artist. If everybody knows that his homes are equipped with audiovisual surveillance and he's got young girls, I mean, people are not going to wander into that honey trap. And the same thing happened with Spence. But both of them had a tremendous amount of media on them. Now, Spence killed himself. People think that he was suicided. I think my take on Spence is that he was given the choice. Either you can kill yourself or we can kill you. And he checked into the Boston Ritz, and he wore a tuxedo, and he took an overdose of nortriptyline, which is an antidepressant. And then he had a clipping next to him about CIA agents being called before government bodies to testify, because he was called before a grand jury to testify. I think he ducked it. I don't know whether or not he was part of that grand jury. And I think the same thing happened with Epstein, that he had become there was just too much notoriety on him. And
you think he got the choice?
I think so.
You think they relaxed the security so that he could make that decision himself?
Yeah, I mean, the thing about Epstein, I've had some networks call me, like Vice called me and said, we'd like to talk to you about whether or not Epstein killed himself. And I said, to me, that's kind of like a red herring, because the most important thing with Epstein is that the government is covering up child trafficking, and all these perpetrators have molested all these little girls with impunity. That is the most important thing. And I think that his death is a way to steer people away from that. So, I mean, with Epstein, if he didn't kill himself, I'm sure he had some help.
Well, I mean, I think it's an important part of the discussion because it shows how corrupt our government is, correct? And what they will do to keep this from seeing the light of day.
Well, William Barr was the
and to
Attorney
keep
General.
themselves from being prosecuted.
It's William Barr was the Attorney General under Trump that covered all this up. And that guy is really dirty. Your viewers, Google William Barr, and there's going to be a lot of dirt that comes up about William Barr. And what's really interesting about William Barr is the Franklin scandal was covered up by the Bush 1 administration, that network. And Richard Thornburg was the Attorney General, and William Barr was the number 2 guy. And then ultimately Richard Thornburg went to run for Senate in Pennsylvania, and then William Barr became the Attorney General. And he covered the Franklin network up. There were 2 federal grand juries that covered the Franklin network up, one in Nebraska and one in Washington, D.C. And then lo and behold, he's Trump's Attorney General covering up the Epstein network. And it's really interesting because Donald Barr, William Barr's father, hired Jeffrey Epstein in 1974 to teach at Dalton School. And Epstein was not qualified. He was a college dropout. And Dalton is one of the most exclusive preparatory schools in the world. And what I found, okay, so I was looking through, Interlochen is like an art school in northern Michigan. And they have a summer camp. And I've got a picture of Epstein. And this is weird. It's a yearbook, but it doesn't have any names. But there's a picture of Epstein, a young Jeffrey Epstein in 1967. And then there's someone that looks like William Barr or a doppelganger of William Barr attending that camp that year. And your viewers can go to my website and I show the pictures. And then I juxtapose the picture of who I believe is the young William Barr with the old William Barr. Now, Interlochen has said that William Barr didn't attend that camp, but it couldn't say that Epstein didn't attend the camp because Epstein gave them $500,000 to build the Epstein Lodge, which is no longer the Epstein Lodge. But it's interesting. So there are those 2 pictures, and then 7 years later, Barr's father hires Epstein to work at Dalton School. And I don't know if he molested any girls there, but he was certainly, according to what I've read, he was very inappropriate.
Epstein?
Yeah, with some of the girls there.
Man, this shit just keeps getting deeper and deeper.
Well, that's why I formed Epstein Justice. I have seen these pedophile networks at work. I've seen them covered up. I've done 2 podcasts on the snow killings, which it was a huge pedophile network. And Francis Sheldon was a wealthy guy and he ran it. And he bought an island. This was like an Epstein Island before Epstein. And this was in the 70s. He bought an island and had a runway built. And he would fly kids to the island where they'd get molested and he'd make child pornography. And there were 4 kids that were dumped on highways or roads within like a 11-month period of time. And I think that there were a number of pedophiles in that network that definitely knew about it and probably participated in killing all of them. The killings were pinned on Christopher Bush, and Christopher Bush ostensibly committed suicide, but there was no blood splatter. I mean, the whole thing was really poorly staged as far as like suicide. It was kind of a ramshackle exploit. But there's that network. Francis Sheldon, nothing ever happened to him. I mean, he went to Amsterdam, and then he ultimately ended up at an orphanage in India, where he could molest kids to his heart's content. There's the Franklin Network. There's Epstein Network. I mean, all these networks have been covered up.
Man.
And we as Americans...
I mean, all of these networks. I mean, did you watch that movie, The Sound of Freedom, by chance?
Yes.
I interviewed Jim Caviezel.
Uh-huh.
They took it down. They took the video, I just looked it up, had like 1.8 million views. Pulled it. Just like, no warning, no nothing. Too much traction on this subject. No reasoning. They just pulled it down.
I mean, so with Epstein, Alexander Acosta was the U.S. attorney for the District of Southern Florida. And he had a list of 36 Epstein victims. I have the list. And he was going to impanel a grand jury to go after Epstein, but he was told to stand down because Epstein was intelligence. And I believe that constitutionally there are only two people that can tell a U.S. attorney to stand down. One is the president, one is the attorney general. I mean, the message can be delivered by the president or the attorney general, but it has to emanate from one of those two positions. So that is very telling of how much power is there to cover up Epstein. According to state and federal law enforcement, not a single child was molested by the pimps that ran the Franklin scandal. Not a single child. And then when you get into the Snow killings, it gets kind of mind-boggling because there's a number of people, there were pedophiles that were arrested and polygraphed about the Snow killings, and a bunch of them came back negative, or a bunch of them came back that they were lying about that. And then there was mitochondrial DNA found in someone's car of one of the kids. But after Christopher Bush was ostensibly committed suicide, that was it. That was the end of the investigation. A task force was formed, and they didn't make one arrest.
Man.
So this is something that we have to take care of. Last time I was here, the CDC, Centers for Disease Control, says that 25% of underage girls have been molested, and 5% of underage boys. Now, most people believe that underage boys is way underestimated. But right there's 50 million Americans. If you're talking 25% of women and 5% of men, that's 50 million Americans that have been molested as underage boys or girls.
Yeah.
So this is a huge problem that we have to deal with. And it's difficult to know how many kids are trafficked, but I've seen some numbers that look relatively strong that indicate like 300,000 kids are trafficked in the United States. And where there's a misnomer with people is that they think that like they're Mexican kids or Eastern European kids. That's not the case. 85% of children that are trafficked in America are American children.
Man, that is very painful to hear. But Nick, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll dive into P. Diddy and the connection between him and Epstein.
Okay.
Folks, there's a great deal right now to help motivate you to take action and improve your sleep. My friends over at Helix are offering all of my listeners 20% off their entire mattress line. You see that I've been on the road traveling a lot this year, and I always look forward to coming home to my own bed and getting a great night's sleep. Hotels can be great, but I always cannot wait to get back to my Helix mattress. My wife and I spent time searching for the right fit for our lifestyle, and Helix mattresses made it super easy. In just a few minutes, the Helix team learns about your sleep patterns and recommends the right mattress for you so you get the perfect match. From the position you sleep in to your body type or your unique needs, Helix will recommend the right mattress for you. Visit helixsleep.com/SRS to start your match today. And as I said, they're offering 20% off to my listeners. That's helixsleep.com/SRS. When I first started podcasting, opening an online store is something I knew I needed to do, but I had zero clue on where to start. Tried all these different platforms, and then I found Shopify. Shopify made the entire setup process fast and easy, prompting me to do everything like set up products, create blogs, and connect my social media. Because of Shopify, my online business runs more smoothly than ever. It's simple to manage and powerful enough for everything I need. I've tried just about every platform you can think of, and Shopify is my go-to every time. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout we use with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/Shawn. That's all lowercase. Again, go to shopify.com/Shawn to upgrade your selling today. That's shopify.com/Shawn. All right, Nick, we're back from the break, and we just covered a whole bunch of Epstein stuff. What do you got on P. Diddy? That's the latest thing in the news. Sounds like there may be some type of a connection there. Let's just start at the very beginning with him.
So P. Diddy, he's an interesting story. His dad was a drug dealer who got shot. I've been told the contract was sanctioned by Frank Lucas, but I'm not sure. And then he and his mom moved north of New York City, and I believe he went to Howard for a couple of years, and he dropped out. And then he did various things for various record companies. And then in 1993, he and Clive Davis founded Bad Boy Records. Clive Davis, how do you describe Clive Davis? There's an infomercial about him now, which is a document. It's being called a documentary. And it makes him look like this benign octogenarian that's helped all these rock stars with their careers. But people in the music industry really don't like Clive Davis, most of them. And his criminality is kind of amazing. He got busted. He's been for filing false tax returns 3 times and then defrauding the IRS 3 times. He was involved in the biggest payola scandal. That's when record companies give money to radio stations to play their songs. Mm-hmm. He was part of the biggest payola scandal of all time as president of ABC Records. And then there was a Genovese crime guy named Pasquale Falcone, and he got busted smuggling 22 pounds of heroin into the United States. And the Justice Department started digging into him, and they came across all these shell companies that he headed. And Clive Davis was funneling money from ABC Records to these shell companies. So I've just told you about 2 decades worth of criminality by Clive Davis, and that guy has not spent one night in jail. That's what's amazing about him. So in 1993, I think he takes P. Diddy by the hand and they get on the yellow brick road. And P. Diddy has been engaged in all kind of criminal behavior, but nothing has come out. And I believe for Clive Davis, this is just my surmise, for a guy to commit as many felonies as he's committed and not spend a day in jail I believe he's working for the government on some level as an informant. I mean, who knows? But so
An informant for what? What makes you think he's working for the government?
I would say like an informant for the FBI or...
For what? What would they be collecting?
I mean, a guy in that position, I'm sure has quite a panoramic view of certain types of corruption and criminality.
Where? In what realm?
In the music realm.
Do you think the FBI is actually interested in the music realm?
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of laws on the books about what people could, like the payola scandal. It's against the law for people to give money, for record companies to give money to radio stations. And who knows? I mean, I've heard that that's still going on, but the FBI might want. It's difficult to know. I mean, the FBI might want to enforce that law. Or
I mean, the Epstein stuff totally makes sense to me. It totally makes sense how that guy would be in intelligence and in holding as many U.S. politicians and elites as they possibly can with blackmail. That makes perfect sense to me. I'm not familiar with this man. I don't think that would be on the same level, you know. And I have no idea. This is the first I'm hearing about this, so just take whatever I'm saying with a grain of salt. But it seems very low level compared to the Epstein stuff.
Well, the thing about Clive Davis and why I'm suspicious of Clive Davis is how do you commit that many felonies and not spend a day in jail?
Yeah.
I mean, that doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
And then he gets busted committing felonies, and then he gets like the next great record executive job. And then he gets busted doing something else, and then he gets the next great record executive job. So I think that the only way that you can commit those kind of felonies and not spend a night in jail is if you've got something worked out.
Do you think they're holding him? Do you think he may be some type of an informant to blackmail artists into messaging whatever narrative they want in the public eye through musicians? It's
difficult to know, but people think of the power that musicians, rock stars have.
Well, that's kind of what I'm getting at. I mean, I can't remember the numbers, but they say Taylor Swift could influence an enormous percentage of the U.S. population in an election, and so that's why I'm asking. You know, I'm not 100%. Actually, I have no idea who Davis is affiliated with, what kind of musicians he's affiliated with.
The biggest names.
As in who?
Bruce Springsteen. I mean,
okay.
I mean, people like that. He's launched a lot of.
So he could be blackmailing elite musicians to message particular narratives for FBI, CIA.
That's the thing. I just don't know. I mean, but how does a guy commit that many felonies and not spend a day in jail? That is with Clive Davis, that's what I've been trying to get my mind around. And the only thing I can think of is he's an informant of some kind. I mean, if you or I got busted defrauding the IRS just once, we'd probably have to spend some time in jail.
Oh yeah, I mean they put Bernie Carrick in prison for, was it tax evasion for paying for paying his nanny cash. That's tax evasion.
So how does this guy?
I mean, how does everybody pay? I mean, you know, everybody who has lawn care service, are those is that on the books? Yeah. You know what I mean? Give me a break. So
how does a guy get? I mean, he's defrauded. He's been busted defrauding the IRS 3 times. I mean, and filing false tax returns 3 times. So how does it? And then that's not even getting into the payola and the shell companies that he's hooking up with the Genovese guy. I just don't understand how that guy doesn't spend a day in jail.
Yeah.
And I don't understand how there's a documentary about him. Well, I kind of understand that. That makes him not to be this benign octogenarian.
Only reason I'm asking is I'm just curious what you think that intelligence agencies would get out of having him on the books. The only thing that can come to my mind is messaging.
Messaging, like rock stars have a tremendous amount of power.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, who knows? With Clive Davis, I live in New York City and I know some people in the music industry. And they look at him as like the Antichrist. I mean,
really?
Yeah. There's this infomercial, aka documentary about him that, as I said, makes him look as a kindly octogenarian. But the people that I know in the music industry do not hold Clive Davis in very high regard. And in 1993, he hooks up with P. Diddy and they launch Bad Boy Records, which becomes this unbelievable success. Now, P. Diddy has been getting away with all kinds of stuff. There was that shooting that he walked from. Shawn took the fall for it. And we've seen some clips of him beating on women. I mean, that's pretty standard operating procedure for him. But now there's 8 lawsuits that have been filed against him for sexual assault.
Didn't he skip the country immediately after his place was busted?
Well, he was going to skip the country.
He didn't.
But I think he stayed in Florida. And I could be wrong there, but he's got these 8 lawsuits. 2 of them are minors. 2 of the women that are suing him were minors when he molested them. And he molested them in a very brutal manner.
How so?
Well, they were minors and he was very forceful. And then the 5th lawsuit has been filed by Little Rod, who also claims that he was sexually assaulted. But he said, and this is where a lot of the traction is coming from in the media, he was talking about like Cuba Gooding Jr. and other people being in on P. Diddy's sexual sexapades or sex escapades. And but Little Rod said that P. Diddy was trafficking minors too. So we've got 3 accounts of P. Diddy trafficking minors. And his houses in LA were searched and Miami. And there was hidden cameras. And Homeland Security, it's kind of strange. Homeland Security were the people that like spearheaded the investigation. It's usually the FBI that does that. Homeland Security does have a human trafficking division, so it's entirely possible that it's on the up and up, but I'm not quite sure because those search warrants emanated from the Southern District of New York. And why would the Southern District of New York execute search warrants in LA and also Miami? Why wouldn't they just have the U.S. Attorney for Los Angeles or Miami execute those search warrants? And the fact that they emanated from the Southern District, that the U.S. Attorney there is Damien Williams. And Damien Williams, because it's Damien Williams, we know the fix is in. And this is the nexus between Epstein. Damien Williams is the nexus between Epstein and P. Diddy.
Interesting.
Williams was the one, the trial of Maxwell, there were 4 Epstein victims that were called to testify. Now, those victims had only been molested by Epstein and Maxwell. They had not been molested by any of the power brokers. That was a very carefully choreographed trial. And I know a woman who covered that trial for a media outlet, and she agreed with me that it was very carefully choreographed. And Damien Williams oversaw that. He was a U.S. attorney that oversaw that trial. And he made sure that no one could be indicted other than Maxwell. And so now he's in charge of the P. Diddy investigation. And
Interesting.
And he's ostensibly, there's a grand jury now that's been impaneled to look into the P. Diddy investigation. So with grand juries, a special prosecutor is chosen for a grand jury. And grand jurors are just people that have shown up for jury duty and have been called to a grand jury. So special prosecutors can really twist the opinions and minds of grand jurors because only the evidence that the special prosecutor wants shown and only the witnesses that the special prosecutor calls, that's the information that the grand jurors get. Like the Epstein grand jury in Florida, which the testimony was released about 3 weeks ago, and it really showed how corrupt it is. That special prosecutor, the assistant to the special prosecutor, she's calling this girl who was molested by Epstein when she was 14, who was testifying when she was 16, like a prostitute. I mean, and that grand jury did not indict Epstein on a single count of child abuse. So now we have Damien Williams, the U.S. attorney for the Southern District, and who is considered to be the most powerful federal law enforcement officer in New York. The Southern District that's kind of like a special position for people. And we know that Damien Williams is overseeing this P. Diddy grand jury. And whatever is going to come out of it, I believe the fix is in. I think P. Diddy might get indicted. That grand jury has been impaneled, I think, for about a month. I think P. Diddy might get indicted. I think some people, maybe one of his kids might get indicted. But P. Diddy had what he called freak-off parties. And
what was that?
P. Diddy had what he called freak-off parties.
Freak-off parties.
Freak-off parties, yeah. Where there would just be like a bacchanalian orgy, essentially. And politicians went to those parties. Celebrities went to those parties. Sports stars went to those parties. And he had that hidden audiovisual blackmail thing going on, like Epstein, like Craig Spence. And I just wonder, getting back to Clive Davis, did he get into that via Clive Davis, or did he just come into it by himself? But again, is P. Diddy going to be blackmailing? Because P. Diddy dealt with some unbelievably powerful people. Can P. Diddy blackmail those people by themselves? Or is he blackmailing for some kind of covert entity?
Interesting.
That's the question. But the fact that we got Damien Williams overseeing his investigation, it reached a point with P. Diddy where there were so many sexual assault lawsuits getting filed against him that something had to be done. And all this was coming out about his beating up women. And there was a president of Bad Boy Records that he took a baseball bat to. I mean, he's just a nasty piece of work. And I think it reached a critical mass where something had to be done. So call in Damien Williams. He's covered up Epstein. Now he's going to be covering up P. Diddy.
Yeah, that is a interesting commonality between the two, for sure.
And here's another nexus. Damien Williams, his parents were Jamaican. And he got a grant from the Daisy and from the Paul and Daisy Soros Foundation to go to, I think it was Yale Law School. I think he got like $90,000 from him. And that's Paul Soros is the brother of Peter Soros. And what I find, now this could be something really ominous, or it could just be a very strange coincidence. On the board of the Paul and Daisy Soros Foundation is Peter Soros, Paul Soros' son, and Peter Soros' nephew. And he is circled twice in Epstein's Black Book, not just once, but twice. So is there something really ominous that's going on there, or is that just a coincidence that Damien Williams gets this huge grant from the Paul and Daisy Soros Foundation and Peter Soros is on the board and Damien Williams just goes on to cover up Epstein? These are one of those things that you never know. But it's certainly quite a coincidence. So there's a couple of nexuses there between Epstein and P. Diddy, although Damien Williams is certainly the common denominator.
Do you know what politicians went to the parties? Is there any documentation of that?
There is, I mean,
Where would people find that documentation?
It's coming out on the internet and various news organizations.
Is it real?
I think so. I mean, I'm sure that some of it's just salacious bullshit, but I'm also sure, I mean, there were a lot of people that P. Diddy sucked into his orbit. And it's entirely possible that they were blackmailed.
Yeah. Wow.
Because he had those hidden cameras, and a lot of powerful people and minors. We were talking about that before. If you're drinking and there's a minor and you think she's not a minor, you can
I mean, just right there, you know, I mean, now I don't know. I don't, man, it's just so, it's tricky. It's tricky.
Well,
I mean, it's tricky. It is, you go to a party, maybe you don't know what's going on. You see a what you think is a woman with a drink that automatically would make you assume that she's 21 years old. Oh, surprise, she's not. And we got you on camera.
and that's the thing with P. Diddy, because Damien Williams is overseeing this, we're not going to really know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, eventually stuff will come out about P. Diddy like it has, but I don't think that there's going to be a tremendous amount of justice.
There never seems to be when it comes to kids.
And what I find kind of startling is I'm the only guy that's put together the Damien Williams nexus between the two. I've never heard anybody else talk about Damien Williams. I mean, people talk about like this guy or that guy and all this salacious bullshit, but I've never heard Damien Williams mentioned in any coverage that has anything to do with P. Diddy.
I mean, there was. It also seemed like he had a being very addicted to power and control, because there are also, and correct me if these may be rumors, but I think it does come out. I mean, wasn't he having junior artists sodomize him on camera and such?
Yes. And then he was also Bill Cosbying women too, giving them roofies.
What was that was all power and control. You'll never leave this record label. I own your ass.
Yeah.
You're gonna sodomize me right here on camera, or this all goes away. I mean, is that how it went?
Now, I haven't really found the particulars of it yet like that, but it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, when we're talking about P. Diddy, we're talking about a thoroughly reprehensible individual. And Little Rod, in his lawsuit, says that one of the rappers had a fight with P. Diddy and his son, and they went into the bathroom and shots rang out, and the rapper was shot. And P. Diddy told Little Rod and some other people to move him outside of the studio and say that he'd been hit by gunfire from a drive-by shooting. And actually, it was reported in LA that he was hit by gunfire from a drive-by shooting. And here's the thing with that. How are cops going to not be able to differentiate someone shot at point blank and then shot by a drive-by shooting. I mean, that would be pretty easy
Yeah.
to show the difference, but that's how it's down. It's down, and according to the mainstream media, it's down as a drive-by shooting. And nothing happened. And what's really, I find troubling, shocking, his head of security, Fareed Muhammad, was the head of security for Michael Jackson. So there's a guy, Fareed Muhammad, there's a guy that knows how to keep secrets.
You know, it is, man, these aren't coincidences.
Well, yeah, I mean, you reach so many coincidences that, I mean, what can you extrapolate? But I would say that Fareed Muhammad is a guy that knows how to keep secrets. And he's also, from my research, a great fixer. He's got really good connections in the Los Angeles Police Department and LA Sheriff. The kind of connections that would enable someone who is shot at point blank range and then it's reported that they're shot by a drive-by shooting, those type of connections, to be able to pull something like that off. I guess he's a consummate fixer. And he's made a lot of money. He bought his son, his youngest son, like a huge tract of real estate near San Diego. And Southern California real estate is very, very expensive. So being a security supervisor for Fareed Muhammad has been a very, very good career move for him. First for Michael Jackson and now for P. Diddy.
Wow. I mean, I'd like to, man. So you think it was an intelligence op? Again.
P. Diddy?
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that Damien Williams is involved, if Damien Williams wasn't involved, I would be kind of agnostic. But the fact that Damien Williams is involved shows me that the cover-up is being orchestrated from on high. And with the Epstein case, as I said earlier, Alexander Acosta, the U.S. attorney, was told to stand down. And there's only two people that can tell a U.S. attorney to stand down, and that's the president and the attorney general. Damien Williams is a U.S. attorney, the most powerful U.S. attorney in New York. And he's already choreographed one trial. And now with this grand jury, I mean, who knows what these grand jurors are listening to? I'm sure that, I mean, if P. Diddy doesn't get indicted on anything, I'll be kind of shocked. But I don't think we're going to see many other, maybe his kid might get indicted.
You don't think we'll see a list?
There's not, we're not
that.
going to see a lot of powerful people get indicted. That should be indicted. Like with Epstein, there should have been a lot of people indicted, but with P. Diddy, and there should probably be a lot of people indicted, but we're not going to see because we know who is in charge of the grand jury. So chances are it's going to be a very corrupt grand jury. It's going to serve us a ham sandwich.
Man, that's sad. How was he, is there any news on how he was recruiting these women, these girls, how he was coaxing them in?
He was getting a lot of escorts, for sure. I mean, he was big on escorts. And he was like the two minors that filed the lawsuits. He just was able to get them into his clutches with his fame and his power. And the girls were naive. And they didn't think that they were going to see a monster. They thought they were going to see His Holiness P. Diddy. And then they were in for quite a awakening.
What are they saying?
He forcefully raped them. And one of them was pretty ugly, for sure. And little Rod says multiple minors. So we've got the lawsuit, 2 lawsuits launched by minors, but then little Rod said there were multiple minors, and that made him very uncomfortable when he voiced his reluctance to P. Diddy to be part of these minors. And P. Diddy just kind of said, shut up and go with it. And those are the kind of people that we have atop the music business. I'm sure that there's got to be some good people, but I think that there's a lot of Clive Davises and P. Diddy's that are in our entertainment.
Yeah.
That are involved in our entertainment.
Yeah. Hollywood doesn't. Hollywood seems to be worse.
Hollywood Babylon. I know that I haven't been able to sell a Franklin scandal documentary in Hollywood. I mean, I've tried like 40 times, and I've met with so many different guys.
Hey, would you guys mind just exposing yourself? Let's make a movie about it.
But what's really interesting is a number of times I've gone as like a vice president has really been into it. And then they go to the president, whether it be a network or a platform, and then he or she vetoes it. So there are people in LA that would, or showbiz that would like to see a Franklin scandal docuseries, but we just haven't been able to. And it was optioned by Magnolia Pictures for 3 years. And we had some really high-powered people pitching it. And we still couldn't get people to bite.
Man.
So that's been kind of tough, trying to sell a docuseries on my book.
Yeah. Well, let's get in. Is there anything else we need to cover with P. Diddy?
No, I'd like to talk a little bit about Epstein Justice, though.
Let's do it.
Last time I was here, I was talking about Epstein Justice. And we hadn't been granted 501c3 status, but now we have. And Epstein Justice we're really gaining a lot of momentum. We've got a very good advisory board of some very eminent people in the non-trafficking world are part of our advisory board. We've got a really good staff. And on August 17th, we're having our first forum. We're calling them forums. And it's going to be in Dunlap, Iowa. And what we're doing is we wanted to get a lot of people to show up in Washington, D.C. But we're building an infrastructure. And after Dunlap, Ohio, it's going to be Houston. And we're going to start having these forums where we can bring people together. And what we want, and we've got a newsletter now too, and what we want is people to take the initiative of wanting to put on these forums themselves, and then we will help them with that. Because we have to make a stand with Epstein. We cannot let the government cover up child trafficking. We just have to make that stand. And a lot of people are aware of Epstein. When you've got a disease, there's 3 facets. There's awareness, there's acceptance, there's action. A lot of people are aware of Epstein, but the acceptance part that the government covered up, now that is something that I talk to people and they're not even aware of that. So I think that when we reach a critical mass of acceptance, we'll be able to have action at that point. And I realize we're going against the grain, but I think that the government covering up child trafficking, I really believe it is the only issue that can unite the right and the left at this point. The right and the left are so polarized about everything
Yeah.
except children being molested with impunity.
I don't know if that's necessarily true, Nick. I don't know if that's true.
What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, you see the left, and what are they doing? They are making pedophilia normal again. Not normal again. They're making it normal. They don't want to. They don't want you to call them pedophiles anymore. They want you to call them MAPs, minor attracted persons. This is a real thing.
No, I know.
This is a real thing.
I follow this stuff. But that's like a very small part of the left.
Is it, though?
Yes, it is.
Is it?
Yeah.
Because I don't see anybody on the left calling this shit out. I haven't seen one person on the left say, this is up. No. You know what I see? I see a bunch of complicit people. Maybe they're complicit because they want that to happen. I mean, you see all the we were just talking about all the politicians that have blackmail over them that you haven't even named. And I'm not trying to polarize anything here. I'm just calling out what I see, and what I see is the left not doing anything to protect kids. We are doing sex changes to 8-year-olds. We are calling pedophiles minor attracted persons. And I don't see anybody, and not one person on that side of the aisle, doing a damn thing about it. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I think, on my advisory board, or the Epstein Justice Advisory Board, we have people that are progressives, we have people that are conservatives. I wanted a mix of everybody.
I think that's smart.
And the people that are on our advisory board, and other people I know in the anti-trafficking community, and I know a lot of people in the anti-trafficking community, they all think that's crazy, what you're talking about. They think it's completely insane. I don't doubt that there's a segment of the left. It's kind of like with... I'm
hoping you can name somebody that is actually standing out against this on the left, because I haven't seen it.
It's like QAnon.
I mean, in Washington now, are you aware of this? In Washington state, the state can take your kid if you do not want them to get, what do they call it? Gender affirming care or something. The state will take your kid.
Well, that wokeness. Okay. Now
that's an entire state that got voted in.
The wokeness, I agree with you. It's gotten insane completely. But there's a lot of people on the left that think it's insane. It's like QAnon on the right, where the Clintons are Satanists and they're trafficking their children and they're going to eat them. I mean, QAnon was pretty far out there. And that is the problem, is that people on the left think everybody's QAnon. And people on the right think everybody on the left is about woke. And most people that I live in New York City, which is kind of the epicenter of liberalism, and most people that I know that are on the left think it's completely insane.
Then how does this stuff keep passing?
I mean, how did QAnon? I mean, when you get zealous people...
QAnon isn't turning into law. This shit is turning into law.
I agree with that. And I think, because I know some pretty big liberal pundits, and they're kind of afraid to touch this. But it is getting rolled back. It's getting to the point where men could identify as women and be thrown in women's prisons or jails. And that's being outlawed. And men participating in women's sports. I mean, it went that far. It got that crazy, but now it's the pendulum is coming back. And I think that will eventually reach some kind of equilibrium. I do believe that. But I think it's a misnomer to think that everybody on the left is behind that. is cool with.
I don't believe everybody on the left is behind that. All I'm asking is, why is nobody on the left standing up for these kids? But they are standing up for pedophiles. They are standing up for pedophiles. Silence is, I mean, they're not saying anything. They're not standing up for the kids. They're kids. They're f***ing kids.
There are people.
This is some shit we could actually do something about right now. Right now. All they have to do is vocalize that they are not for this and don't vote for this shit. But they continue to vote for it. And yeah, I'm sure that there are people out there on the left that, I mean, I hate that we even have to have this discussion. I'm sure there are people that vote left that are against this, but they sure as hell aren't saying anything about it.
I know feminists that are completely appalled by it. Far left feminists that are completely appalled by it. Especially, they think that it's like a men's right movement because of men being identifying as women and being allowed to. I mean, and that has not happened a lot, where men have identified as women and ended up in jails and raped women. I mean, it's happened, but it hasn't happened a lot. And then you had Riley Gaines, the swimmer, coming out and saying, "This is insane that men are competing as women," and that she's been listened to. I mean, that's changing. So I think the pendulum swung pretty far to the left, but I think it's coming back as we look at, and throughout history, we see pendulums swing to the left and then ultimately swing back. And I think that's kind of what's going to happen here.
Yeah. Well, I hope you're right.
I do too.
You know, because, I mean, I have some left-leaning views. I do. But I can, when I see headline after headline, it just came out again a couple days ago in California. What did you see that?
No.
It's, man, what was the headline? We might have to pause it and look it up, but it was teachers, and this is teachers, what was it? Now teachers basically don't have to inform the parents if a child is wanting to change sex, basically is what the bill has to do with. But I mean, it's just, the point I'm making is, yeah, I mean, there is crazy shit on the right too that annoys me, but it's conspiracy shit like you were just talking about. It's not law. It's not harming children. It's not standing up for pedophilia and trying to normalize it in society. And that I mean, I have kids, and that really bothers me. Really bothers me. To me, there is nothing more evil in this world than to sexually assault little kids.
Yeah, I mean, I think.
I don't know how anybody can be behind that, but they are.
But I mean, it's like NAMBLA. It's a very small percentage of people on the left. They are not going to. Pedophilia is not going to be legalized.
Well, they're making a hell of a lot of ground.
There are people that are trying, but that's come up occasionally over the years, and it's not going to be that will not happen. I was hanging out I'm in Tennessee. I'm visiting a couple of old friends of mine, and they've got 3 kids, and the husband is fairly conservative. The wife is fairly liberal. The kids are pretty liberal. And we were just talking about this last night at the dinner table. And I said to them, what do you guys think about? And they're...
What do you think about what? Which one are we talking about?
I'm talking about the kids getting sex changes. And they're pretty liberal. I mean, they all go to very good schools, but they're liberal kids. And I said, I kind of started out the conversation. I said, I don't see how people...
It's a hell of a dinner conversation, Nick.
It's well, we were drifting in that area, and then I figured, it was before dessert.
Hey, by the way, what do you guys?
So I said to them, when I was 12 or 13 years old, I had no idea of who I was. So how could I even begin to try to find my? I mean, even think about something like that. And those three kids agreed with me that these are issues that shouldn't be involved, that kids shouldn't be involved in it. They've got to be 18, at least 18. And I think that there's a lot of people that don't even know who they are when they're 18. I mean, there's a lot of people that don't know who they are when they're 40. But definitely, when I see people under 18 given hormone blockers, I find it truly repulsive. But again, I think that most of the people on the left find that repulsive too. I really do.
Why do you think they don't vocalize it?
I know that there's some left-wing pundits that I know that are concerned about various issues, and they don't want to deal with that type of an issue. They're concerned about the Ukraine war, the war in Gaza, and they don't want to be bogged down by that particular issue. So
yeah, they're more concerned about foreign wars.
Yes.
That we probably should not even be involved with, rather than our own kids here in this country. I'd love to interview one of those pundits.
I will
have that conversation.
I will actually see if I can get one to talk to you.
Good.
Because with the anti-trafficking movement, it's pretty interesting. It's people that are religious and people that are very far left feminist. Those are the two groups that are most prominent in the anti-trafficking movement, anti-child trafficking movement. And I see them coming together for this issue. And I think that they can come together for this issue around Epstein. I mean, once people understand Epstein and Franklin and the Snow murders and P. Diddy, I mean, it just keeps coming. I mean, the Catholic Church, the Boy Scouts, that type of issue, I believe, I mean, I see it now, unites the right and the left in the anti-trafficking movement, anti-human trafficking movement. So I believe that it can happen on a much bigger scale.
I hope you're right, Nick.
I do too.
I would love to see some people on the left start taking a stand on this stuff. Even when the Sound of Freedom came out. Remember all those headlines?
Yeah.
It's all conspiracy. It's all this. It's all that. That was all left-wing media putting that shit out. And hold on. And the point of it is, it's, hey, whether this is conspiracy or not, this shit is happening. It is happening right now. And that movie, whether it was true or not, some type of fiction based off of whatever, that was educating parents and kids on how this happens and how prominent it actually is in our society. And they fucking blew it off. They made it out to be, some bullshit that people shouldn't be watching. They tried as hard as they could to squash that so that it didn't gain any traction. Oh, sorry, but the only thing that movie did was educate and bring awareness to what the fuck is actually going on. And they tried to squash it. Now, why do you think they tried to squash it? Because they didn't want the awareness.
But we are talking about the mainstream media that tried to squash it. The mainstream media has tried to squash me. Is that a right or a left thing? I don't know. I think that the left might have buy into it, the Sound of Freedom. But I know lots of people on the left that went to the Sound of Freedom. I do know some people on the left that thought it was going to be right-wing propaganda. I mean, Tim Ballard, given his behavior, I mean, he didn't really help that issue too much. But the media, because for me, I've been ostracized by the right and the left media. I mean, there was...
we could go... I don't want it to sound like I'm just leaning one way.
No, I get it.
Because we could go off on the right now, but that it's not relevant to this discussion.
I was going to be... okay, I told you about the CNN where they said we're going to go a different direction. When Sandusky was breaking, there was a younger producer at Fox that had read the Franklin scandal, and she called my publisher and said that she'd like to talk to me. And then, so we talked, and I told her what I thought about Sandusky, and I said, what you have here is an institution that just wants to perpetuate its money, power, and its prestige. And, it's not going to care. Children are going to be put in second place to that. And then I talked to the senior producer for about 3 minutes. And she told my publisher that I sounded incoherent. And that's the reason why she was going to. And this is Fox now. So I've been ostracized by both the right and the left.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. I believe, as crazy as things are right now, I believe in the fundamental decency of Americans to do the right thing. I do believe in that Americans will do the right thing. And I think that there might be some small segment of people on the left that want to legalize pedophilia. I don't see pedophilia ever legalized. I mean, I just don't see it. There'd be too much blowback because I think that Americans are fundamentally decent people. I believe that the media, and we were just talking about this, I believe that the media can affect them. And negatively. And what's really interesting that I find is that 66% of Americans don't trust the mainstream media, but yet they listen to it. But there's blogs and there's podcasts. Mm-hmm. I mean, for me, when I was shut up in 2002, 2003, 2004, all those years, I was shut up by the mainstream media. And I didn't have really an opportunity to get my message out there about the Franklin scandal and then about Epstein. But now I do. I mean, there's a lot of outlets like your show. I can get my message out. I don't need the mainstream media. I think the mainstream media is very corrupt, regardless if it's right or it's left. 6 corporations churn out 90% of the media that's imbibed by Americans. You've got these 6 titanic corporations, and they could easily be broken up with the Sherman Antitrust Act. This is my feeling about it. I think that there's a détente between these titanic media conglomerates and the government, because the government could step in and break them up at any time. So I think they appease each other. And whether it be right or left, like Nick Bryant has been ostracized from both sides. I mean, I've been getting interviewed by Newsmax lately, but I've been banished by both the right and the left.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
like I said, Nick, I'm not saying the right's any better. I'm talking about this one particular issue.
And I think that issue is crazy. And I think most Americans know it's crazy. And I think that the political correctness that was kind of incubating in the 90s has ultimately led to this. And that political correctness it's a force in academia, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that what we're dealing with now is an outgrowth of that. But I also think that the vast majority of Americans are against it. And I don't see it.
Yeah. All I know is it's not getting smaller. It's getting bigger. More and more states are passing this shit. It's coming in headlines more and more and more. I mean, I remember a year ago, we were interviewing this guy, Ryan Montgomery, who I think you know who that is?
Yeah, I talked to him.
Yeah. Interviewed this guy, Ryan Montgomery, re-brought up the maps. Oh, guess what? I got labeled a conspiracy theorist again. And then, bam, here's this article. Bam, here's that article. This state, that state. Bam, bam, bam. It's everywhere. It just came out again, a couple days ago. Like I just said, this new thing in California with the kids. So, I mean, I want to believe you. I do. That the majority of Americans don't want this, but the problem is it's a growing problem, not a shrinking problem.
And do you think that is an outgrowth of we've got a government that's letting children get molested with impunity? Do you think that there's any kind of correlation between that and what we have here?
Possibly.
Because I've been writing about children's issues since 1990.
Yeah.
I've written a book about lower socioeconomic children. And what I see is it's pretty egregious what's happening to American children. Families with children are the fast-growing segment of the homeless population. Although it's gotten better, when I wrote that book, there were 10 million American children that were uninsured. Now there's, I think, far less. But 22.5% or 22% of American children are growing up below the poverty threshold. But when you juxtapose, there was a study done by Greg Duncan. He was a University of Michigan researcher. And he found that if a child is born at a low birth weight, which is generally because of the mother doesn't receive proper prenatal care, and they're subjected to continuous poverty for 5 years, if they're white, their IQ is going to be 90. If they're black, their IQ is going to be 85. And millions of American children experience hunger every month. So this is where our government needs to step in and start helping children. And I think that a lot of Americans aren't really aware of the state of American children. With what I see with like children being the fast-growing segment of the homeless population, children being without health care insurance, I think it's kind of a wholesale destruction of our children. And with Epstein and Franklin and these other issues we've been talking about, I think that's kind of a retail destruction of our children. Where there's a wholesale destruction, there's a retail destruction. So I think Americans are fundamentally decent, but they really need edification about the state of their children.
Yeah.
So, that's a tough question. I ask that to myself all the time.
Yeah. Well, let's move into the truth about Watergate. I know everybody out there has to be
just as frustrated as I am when it comes to the BS and the rhetoric that the mainstream media continuously tries to force feed us. And I also know how frustrating it can be to try to find some type of a reliable news source. It's getting really hard to find the truth and what's going on in the country and in the world. And so one thing we've done here at Shawn Ryan Show is we are developing our newsletter. And the first contributor to the newsletter that we have is a woman, former CIA targeter. Some of you may know her as Sarah Adams, call sign Superbad. She's made 2 different appearances here on the Shawn Ryan Show. And some of the stuff that she has uncovered and broke on this show is just absolutely mind-blowing. And so I've asked her if she would contribute to the newsletter and give us a weekly intelligence brief. So it's going to be all things terrorists, how terrorists are coming up through the southern border, how they're entering the country, how they're traveling, what these different terrorist organizations throughout the world are up to. And here's the best part, the newsletter is actually free. We're not going to spam you. It's about 1 newsletter a week, maybe 2 if we release 2 shows. The only other thing that's going to be in there besides the intel brief is if we have a new product or something like that. But like I said, it's a free CIA intelligence brief. Sign up. Links in the description or in the comments. We'll see you in the newsletter. Join me and my special guest for the next behind-the-scenes experience exclusively available on Vigilance Elite Patreon. The behind-the-scenes footage is raw and uncut. This is as close to the set as you can possibly get. You can expect anything from off-topic conversations, studio tours, the final moments before the interview starts, and everything in between. The behind-the-scenes content is constantly evolving and will continue to bring you more as we grow. You can gain access for just $15 a month exclusively at Vigilance Elite Patreon. All right, Nick, we're back from the break. Let's talk about your new book.
The Truth About Watergate, a tale of extraordinary lies and liars. There's been some great books written about Watergate. I mean, really good books, but they're tomes and they're complex. And they have to be studied. The best books about Watergate, like Secret Agenda and Silent Coup, great books. The scholarship is amazing, but you just can't pick up one of those books and read it and fully understand what's going on. And I started looking into Watergate when I was researching Franklin in D.C., I heard a bunch of stuff about Bob Woodward, the famed journalist. Him and Carl Bernstein broke Watergate. Stuff that was very unsavory about Bob Woodward. And over the years, I've just kind of collected books on Watergate, and I've read them. And I concluded that Bob Woodward was lying, and we'll get into it later about Deep Throat. I mean, it just doesn't it just doesn't align. I mean, the physics of it. But the more and more I read it about Watergate, the more I wanted to write a book. But I wanted to write a simple book. I wanted to make Watergate as simple as possible. So it could be Watergate for dummies. But it's still very complex. Watergate is a conspiracy within a conspiracy, and I'll kind of explain that later. But Watergate is so complex. There's so much misdirection going on. And the media's portrayal of Watergate is magnanimous. I mean, it's an enormous lie. And with Watergate, okay, so Nixon got elected in '68, and he'd been a hawk. He'd been really an anti-communist hawk. He was in the House on Un-American Activities, going after people. And he ran for president in '60, and he got beat by JFK. And then he ran for California governor in 62 and he got beat. And then he moved to New York and thought he was done with politics. And he was pretty acerbic. When he got beat for governor, he said some pretty nasty things about the media. But then in 1966, 67, he saw America becoming unglued by the Vietnam War and all the protests. And that was like horrifying to most Americans. But to Nixon, it was a siren song. It summoned him back to politics. And while he had spent 8 years in the wilderness, he had concluded that containment with the Soviet Union and the communists wasn't working. And he wanted to actually become a peacemaker. And when he was campaigning in 68, and I'm not a Nixon apologist, he did some good things, he did some bad things. But when he was campaigning in 67, he was talking about, I'm going to be the peacemaker. And everybody thought, oh, this is just Nixon lying and, it's just a cynical campaign ploy. But when he did get elected, he started reaching out to the communist Chinese and he started reaching out to the Russians. He wanted to do strategic arm limitations with the Soviet Union, and he wanted to open up China for diplomatic relations because once China had become communist, once Mao had defeated Chiang Kai-shek, we just completely ostracized China. And Nixon knew that he was going to have to go up against the Hawks to do this. And he knew how much power the Hawks had. And on his, I think it's the second day, he came out with National Security Memorandum Decision 2, which sounds kind of like an innocuous bureaucratic directive. But basically what he said is that the CIA, the Department of Defense, and the State Department will have no bearing on any of my geopolitical moves. So basically, he was telling the Hawks to go to hell. And then he took the National Security Council, which had been kind of like a think tank, and he turned that into something that would have bearing on his geopolitical moves. And Richard Helms, who was the head of the CIA, he would allow Helms to brief the National Security Council, but as soon as he was done briefing, he would have to leave. He was persona non grata. And Nixon really disliked Helms, really disliked him. And actually, he thought that the CIA had burned him in the 1960 political campaign against JFK, because JFK was attacking him and the Eisenhower administration for being soft on communism, even though the Eisenhower administration was gearing up for what would be the Bay of Pigs. And Nixon thought that the CIA had told that to Kennedy and undermined his run for the presidency at that point. So Nixon didn't like the CIA and he wanted to become a peacemaker. So he started making overtures to the communists, the Chinese, and then the Russians. He really wanted to de-escalate the arms race. And he was doing all this clandestinely through the Navy had this top secret communication system called SR1. He was doing it all clandestinely through SR1. And the Hawks were alarmed. And the Joint Chiefs of Staff actually initiated an espionage ring against the Nixon administration. There was Thomas Moore. He was the head of the Joint Chiefs, is an admiral. And it's called the Moore-Radford affair, because Radford was this lowly yeoman who was the liaison between the Joint Chiefs and the National Security Council. And Haig was the inside man for them at the National Security Council. And Haig was enabling Radford to get all these top secret documents. Like, we were allies with India, but Pakistan had a dictator that was friendly to China. So the Nixon administration although Pakistan and India were engaged at a war, the Nixon administration tacitly approved what Pakistan was doing. And then probably Admiral Moore leaked it out to the press, and there was this huge blowback because the Pakistan dictator was kind of a bloodthirsty type. But Nixon wanted so badly to open up communications with the Chinese that he was willing to do these things. And so the Joint Chiefs has this espionage ring where they're collecting all this information on what Nixon's doing. But the Nixon administration ultimately outs them. And at that point, the CIA starts infiltrating. And the guys it's amazing how many CIA people, intelligence people infiltrate the Nixon administration. And the big thing with Watergate is there were two conspiracies going on, but the first conspiracy was the CIA trying to bring down the Nixon administration. And there were a number of leaks going on, like the Pakistan leak and the Pentagon Papers and these various leaks, and they were driving Nixon crazy. And Ehrlichman put together a crew called the Plumbers, and the raison d'etre for the Plumbers was to plug leaks. And that's where these CI guys ended up, is E. Howard Hunt, who was a scurrilous guy, and James McCord, who was... it's kind of difficult to describe James McCord, but they penetrated the Plumbers. And G. Gordon Liddy was supposedly the head of the Plumbers, but McCord and Hunt, these guys were like super spooks, and they just ran circles around Liddy. Liddy had no idea what these guys were up to. And then, so you've got the CIA wanting to take down Nixon and infiltrating the Plumbers. But you've got something else going on. John Dean, who is one of the heroes of Watergate, who saw that he saw the moral turpitude of the Nixon administration and came clean and helped bring Nixon down. John Dean, there's some amazing liars, extraordinary liars in Watergate, but John Dean is right up there with Woodward and Bernstein when it comes to lies. But John Dean's wife, Maureen Dean, knew or worked for a woman named Heidi Reichen. And Heidi Reichen ran a brothel that was a block away from the Watergate. And if you were a Democratic big shot, you go to it. There's a secretary named Maxie Wells at the Democratic National Committee. You would go to her, and she would provide you pictures of the prostitutes. And you would choose the prostitute that you liked, and then you'd go to the Columbia was like upscale apartments. And then you would go to the Columbia, and then you'd have a liaison with the prostitute that you liked. But the CI was filming it. It was run by McCord, that particular honey trap. And you've got these two dynamics with Watergate. You've got the CIA wanting to take the Nixon administration down, and then you've got this brothel that's connected to the DNC. That's a CIA honey trap. So those are the two big variables, and they congeal. And I'll be with you in 1 second after I take the sip of coffee. So Hunt and McCord, they initially, Hunt and Liddy break in to Daniel Ellsberg releases the Pentagon Papers, which show that what's been going on in Vietnam is a lie, that we're not making any progress in Vietnam. So Hunt gets these Cubans who were our CIA assets, and they break into Dr. Fielding's office. And then the next thing is Watergate. Now, it's kind of interesting why the Watergate was chosen. And Nixon did not order a break-in into the Watergate. I don't believe Ehrlichman and Haldeman, they were number two. H.R. Haldeman was the number two guy in the Nixon administration. John Ehrlichman was the number three guy. And John Mitchell was the attorney general and number four guy. None of those guys ordered that break-in. John Dean was counsel to the president, and Jeb Magruder was the acting boss of the committee to reelect the president. John Mitchell, the attorney general, was going to take over from Magruder, but while Mitchell served as attorney general, Magruder was the acting boss. And he and Dean were the ones that colluded together and sent those burglars into the Watergate. And the first time they broke in, so they broke the Democratic National Committee was on the 6th floor, and the Federal Reserve was on the 8th floor. So McCord and four Cubans sign in like at 11:30 on a Friday night to the 8th floor, to the Federal Reserve, which had been burgled and had intensified security at that point. I mean, they were trying to get busted. And the security guard had the IQ of an avocado. He couldn't put it together that these guys were about to pull off a burglary. So they went in there a second time, and they actually told... There was a D.C. cop named Carl Schaffler, and he was a CIA guy, but he was also a D.C. guy, a D.C. police officer. And one of McCord's underlings called Schaffler and said, "We're breaking into the Watergate tonight." So we need, and Schaffler was parked 2 blocks away from the Watergate. He should not have been there that night. And here's where the two conspiracies come together. Because some of those Cubans, one of them, Eugenia Martinez, has the key to the desk drawer that has the pictures. And when they're busted, their photography equipment is set up on that desk. So those were the orders by Dean and Magruder to go after that blackmail material. And Dean knew about that blackmail material because his wife had been associated with that brothel. But the CIA guys, McCord and Hunt, they had a completely different agenda. Their agenda was to get busted. So that's what makes Watergate so complex, is you've got a conspiracy within a conspiracy.
Wow.
And then they got busted, and McCord and Hunt, I mean, they're very intelligent guys and super spooks. I mean, they really are. I mean, their exploits are legendary in the CIA. And they left this breadcrumb trail right to themselves. It was amazing. I mean, like one of the burglars had a check from Howard Hunt. Just really stuff that, and people say, well, it just shows their incompetence. No, it's not their incompetence. They wanted to get busted. They wanted to taint the Nixon administration. So they get busted, and the Cubans really don't know what's going on because they thought they were going in for the pictures. Well, McCord and Hunt, their plan is to get busted. And that's when Watergate starts getting interesting, because Bob Woodward graduates from Yale. And this is actually kind of humorous. Okay, here's the cover story on Bob Woodward. He graduates from Yale. He's accepted to Harvard Law School. But then he goes to the Washington Post and says, I would really like to be a journalist, and I will work for you for 2 weeks. And if you don't like anything I write, you don't have to pay for those 2 weeks. And if you don't like anything I write, then I won't, you guys. I mean, that's the cover story of Bob Woodward. So Bob Woodward ostensibly worked at the Washington Post for 2 weeks, and then he couldn't write. I mean, I think he definitely has a lot of co-authors. I still think he has problems writing. I mean, just my own personal opinion as a writer. But so Woodward is sent to the Montgomery Sentinel, which is owned by the Washington Post. And that's kind of his AAA team to learn how to write and report. And people know at the Montgomery Sentinel that he's a spook. He drives a Karmann Ghia. Okay, he's making $110 a week. He drives a Karmann Ghia. He's staying at a very nice apartment in Washington, D.C. He regularly goes to New York City. I mean, there's just no way that Woodward can live the kind of life that he's living on $110.
Yeah.
So he kind of learns how to write, and he's brought back to the Washington Post. And then within 8 months, he and Bernstein are breaking Watergate. Now, Bernstein is also a pathological liar, like Woodward. And Ben Bradley, the editor-in-chief of the Washington Post, he is also CIA and a pathological liar. There was a woman named Deborah Davis who wrote a book called Catherine the Great about Catherine. Catherine Graham owned the Washington Post. And in the book, Deborah Davis said that Ben Bradley, the editor-in-chief of the Washington Post, was a CIA asset, and that he'd written CIA propaganda during after the Cold War, or after the World War II, during the Cold War. And Bradley went ballistic on her. And the book was published by Harcourt Brace, and Bradley threatened them. And Harcourt Brace pulped the book. And there were a couple of magazines that went after her, calling her unstable. I mean, the intelligence people really tried to dismantle her.
Wow.
Because Bradley is a CIA guy, and he's head of the Washington Post. And the last thing Bradley wants is his connection to the CIA to come out. But what's interesting, so the book gets pulped, and in the interim, Deborah Davis files Freedom of Information Act stuff on Bradley. And then it comes back that Bradley is writing stuff for the CIA. So Bradley did all that to cover himself from being connected to the CIA. He also wants to take Nixon down. Woodward wants to take Nixon down. Bernstein doesn't really care. He's an ethical eunuch. He just wants money for nothing and chicks for free. I mean, he eventually blows a lot of his money on coke and hookers, and he's quite the satyr. But so you've got Woodward and Bernstein with Ben Bradley, and they're breaking all these stories on Nixon. And they're getting information that nobody else is getting. And ultimately, Ehrlichman and Haldeman, the Nixon's chief of staff, and then Haldeman was like domestic czar, they had to, they got tainted and they had to resign. And Alexander Haig, who had worked at the National Security Council, became Nixon's chief of staff. And Haig secretly hated Nixon for pulling out of Vietnam and for forging a relationship with both the Chinese and the Russians. He hated that. But he was good. Haig was a shapeshifter. And he was originally on the National Security Council with Henry Kissinger. And he would play Kissinger and Nixon off one another. I mean, sociopath, but really, really good. And he ended up, when he was at the National consul. He was a 4-star, or he was a colonel, but then Nixon ultimately made him a 4-star general, even though Haig hated him. But he was that good at bamboozling Nixon and everybody around him. But here's the dirty little secret about Watergate. And this is Woodward's big lie. He was briefing, Woodward was a naval intelligence officer. He was briefing Haig in 69 and 70. He and Haig had a relationship. And that's where the damaging information was coming from, was from Haig. But Woodward said he didn't meet Haig till 73, which is all bullshit. And Woodward said Mark Felt is deep throat. Okay, Mark Felt was the associate director of the FBI, but he got fired. And he got fired in May of 73. And according to Woodward and Bernstein and all the president's men, Deep Throat would drive by Woodward's apartment every day. And if Woodward moved the flower pot, that would mean that he wanted to talk to Deep Throat. And Woodward would take all these cabs and be clandestine and would meet in a underground parking lot in Alexandria, Virginia. I mean, it was all bullshit anyway. And then if Deep Throat wanted to talk to Woodward, it was like page 20 of the New York Times, and he'd put a little clock there. Okay, so now here's where reality kind of impinges upon the cover story. Mark Felt was fired in May of 73, and the most damaging information from Deep Throat came in November of 73. So we're supposed to believe that Mark Felt, who had been fired from the FBI, is driving into Washington, D.C. And by the way, Woodward's balcony is facing a courtyard. So he would have to go down an alley and then get out of his car and walk 50 feet and look straight up to see whether or not Woodward had moved his flower pot for them. So, and then the page 20 of the New York Times, all the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, they were all put in a pile at Woodward's apartment building. They weren't taken to his specific room. So that all falls apart. And Woodward rolled out Felt in 2005, and Felt was very far gone with Alzheimer's. And I don't doubt that Felt gave Woodward some information, but the most damaging information came from Alexander Haig. And Archibald Cox was the first Watergate prosecutor. And he was pushing Nixon very hard for taped conversations. It came out that Nixon was taping all his conversations, and that was by Alexander Butterfield, who was another CIA guy.
Wow.
I mean, he was a liaison guy between the CIA and the Army, and he lied to Haldeman to get the job. So he was another CIA guy. And he was the guy that coughed up the tapes. And then once it came out that the tapes were, that Nixon was making tapes of all his conversations, then the prosecutors wanted certain tapes so they could find out what Nixon knew or whether or not he was obstructing justice. And the tapes, Nixon wouldn't surrender the tapes. And he fired the special prosecutor. And then, there was a drumbeat for impeachment. And Nixon realized, whoa, what I just did was really reckless. And then he backpedaled at Mach 3 speed. And he had Haig hire a new special prosecutor. So Haig hired Leon Jaworski, this big-time Houston lawyer, to be the new Watergate prosecutor. Leon Jaworski also got CIA connections.
Wow.
He works at Well, he's a big-time lawyer, but he also works for a foundation that's funneling money to various CI causes domestically. So Haig, and they're looking for the tapes that will incriminate Nixon into the cover-up, because shortly after Watergate, Nixon had Haldeman and Ehrlichman, and Richard Helms was the head of the CIA, and Vernon Walters was the assistant director of the CIA. Had those four get together. And Nixon wanted the FBI or the CIA to quash the FBI investigation. And Nixon had grilled Helms at a certain point because Nixon knew that the CIA had participated in the JFK hit. And it's on the tapes. It's actually kind of funny. There's Richard Helms and Nixon's growing him, "Who shot John? Who shot John?" And, so Helms is very well aware that Nixon knows who shot John. So you've got this meeting between Haldeman and Ehrlichman and Helms and Vernon Walters. And Haldeman says, "You guys have got to play your national security guard and quash this investigation by the FBI into Watergate." And Helms says, "No, we're not going to do that." And now Nixon said to Haldeman, if Helms says no, say it's going to bring about the Bay of Pigs thing, because that was Nixon's kind of nomenclature for the Kennedy hit, the Bay of Pigs thing. So as soon as Haldeman said, "Well, this could lead into the Bay of Pigs thing," then Helms just went ballistic. And Helms is one of those bureaucrats that never shows his emotions, but he just went ballistic and started screaming and hollering, and he goes, "Okay, we'll do it." And then they leave, and Helms double crosses Nixon. He doesn't do it. And which is because Helms just wants, everybody wants, well, the Hawks, and Helms is firmly a Hawk, wants Nixon gone. So what happens is Haig tells Woodward about the tapes, specific tapes. And then Haig tells Jaworski which tapes to subpoena, which the tapes that show like the conversation that Haldeman had with Dick Helms. So all this information is coming from Haig to both Woodward and also Jaworski. And Jaworski eventually subpoenas the tapes that has Nixon talking about covering up Watergate. He did not order Watergate. And actually, those guys did not know who ordered Watergate. They didn't realize till much later that it was Jeb Magruder and John Dean. And the Nixon race was, I mean, the plumbers were engaged in some crazy stuff. So it was easy for Magruder to come in and Dean to come in and tell them to burgle the Watergate. So that's kind of Watergate in a nutshell, is that there was a conspiracy within a conspiracy. Some of the burglars were going for like blackmail material, but the CIA guys definitely wanted Nixon gone. And it ultimately came together. And with the Washington Post, with Bradley and Woodward being of the same ilk as Helms and the Joint Chiefs, they all wanted Nixon gone.
Wow.
So that's how Watergate went down.
Wow.
The Truth About Watergate, a tale of extraordinary lies and liars. And the thing about it is, as far as mendacity goes, we think of Nixon as a preeminent liar, but there were far greater liars in Watergate than just Nixon. I mean, John Dean was an amazing liar, and so is Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein and Ed Bradley. I mean, those guys told unbelievable lies. And the thing with Deep Throat, it's so absurd. When Woodward rolled out Mark Felt with Alzheimer's, he went a bridge too far. I mean, at that point, when I realized that there's no way that Mark Felt could be Deep Throat because he'd been fired, and there's no way he could have been providing that information. That was the first thing I kind of locked onto in Watergate.
Man, That is, I'm not very familiar with Watergate, but that was extremely informative. So
Well, that's what we try to do, writers, is
I can't wait to dive into that book.
it's an interesting book because, as I said, I try to make Watergate as accessible as possible. There are these huge tomes about Watergate, and they're great books, great investigative journalism, but they're so complex. So my goal was to make it as simple as possible, but just about every sentence has a citation. As I said earlier, there's 2,238 citations. So, and most of the stuff that comes from mainstream media, books, where I was able to triangulate lies, and then thousands of pages of government documentation. Because the truth is there, you just have to kind of sift through it.
Yeah.
And I read books about Watergate for a number of years before I decided to write that book.
Well, sounds like you got to the bottom of that too. So
I'm happy with how it's been received. No major publisher would touch it.
of course not.
Unfortunately, Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, they are the Mount Rushmore of journalism. And they tell so many lies. I mean, they lie when they don't even need to lie. That's what's kind of amazing about them. Bernstein said that he ducked a subpoena, that he was going to get subpoenaed, and he ducked the subpoena, and he went and saw the movie Deep Throat. At that point, when he ducked that subpoena, the movie Deep Throat wasn't even showing in Washington, D.C. I mean, the lies. I mean, Bernstein talks about going out to, I think it's Maryland or Virginia, to meet with one of the treasurers of the committee to reelect the president. And he talks about going through this hellacious rain, this hellacious storm as he's driving out there. There was no storm that day. I mean, and if you read All the President's Men, which won a Pulitzer Prize, became a bestseller, and that was a movie with Robert Redford and Dustin Hoffman, it's fiction. It's been embraced as reality, and you've got all these kids going to journalism school wanting to be Woodward and Bernstein when really there is no Woodward and Bernstein.
Wow.
And it was a silent coup. The coup of 1963 was very problematic. Most Americans did not believe the Warren Commission report. 66% of Americans believe that Oswald didn't act alone, but it was even higher there because the Warren Commission is, as Bobby Kennedy said, the Bobby Kennedy that got assassinated, a pretty shoddy piece of work. So I think assassinating Nixon was off the table. This was how they felt like they had to get him out.
Man.
But what's really interesting, in 1967, because there was a huge backlash against the Warren Commission report. I mean, the Warren Commission report is very problematic. And a lot of people weren't buying it. So the CIA came out with a dispatch in 1967, and it said that the people who don't believe in the Warren Commission, we're going to call them conspiracy theorists. And then it gave a number of rationales why conspiracy theorists are conspiracy theorists. And then it was disseminated to editors and people with juice. The New York Times and the Washington Post used the word conspiracy theorist about once a year prior to that 1967 dispatch. But after that 1976 dispatch, the term conspiracy theory and conspiracy theorist just shot up exponentially in both papers. So people just automatically think of something and they go, oh, conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
They're drinking the Kool-Aid.
Yeah. Still see it today?
Yeah, they have no idea that they're drinking the Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
It kind of amazes me.
It's very interesting to see how easily people get sucked in.
And I think eventually Watergate's going to be broken open. There's too many good books about it. I mean, my book is a good overview of what actually happened. And then there's some really good books about it. I mean, really amazing investigative journalism has been done with Watergate. So I think that John Dean and Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein are really, it's only a matter of time till they're outed as liars. The history is not going to look very favorably on them. And the thing about Nixon, and I'm not a Nixon apologist, he did some bad things. I mean, he fomented the coup, the Pinochet coup in Chile, which Pinochet was a bad guy. He facilitated Suharto in Indonesia. And then we basically gave tacit approval of Pol Pot because Pol Pot was aligned with the Chinese and we wanted to establish diplomatic relations with Chinese. So Nixon did some really bad things, but he also did some really good things too. In addition to trying to become a peacemaker with the Soviet Union, limit nuclear arms, he tried to get universal health care passed. And he tried to get for families with children, a minimum amount of money that they would get, which was like $4,500 from the government. If they were getting like $25,000, they'd be, or if they're getting like $3,000, they'd be supplemented, which would be $40,000 now. So Nixon he started the EPA, he started OSHA, he went up 131% on welfare spending. He increased education spending by 50%. Now he's just looked at this monolith of evil, but he did do some good things. I mean, but he tangled with the wrong people. He thought he was a smart guy. He thought he could beat them, that he could outwit them.
Man, fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
Well, Nick, I just want to say thank you for
You
coming
bet.
on, and the link to your new book, The Truth About Watergate, will be in the description below, and just want to say thank you.
And I want to remind people, the first Epstein Justice Forum is in Dunlap, Iowa on July 17th, and we're going to have a fundraiser in Knoxville on September 27th. So we're going to get this Epstein justice machine going.
Good. Makes me happy to hear.
I'm doing this with some pretty stalwart people, so we're going to give it our best shot.
Good.
And we're going to succeed. I'll predict that right now. As Joe Namath predicted before the 1969 Super Bowl, we're going to win. And everybody thought he was crazy. Well, I'm predicting Epstein justice will prevail.
Well, I hope it does. I really do. And I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you.
No matter where you're watching Shawn Ryan Show from, if you get anything out of this, please like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share this everywhere you possibly can. And if you're feeling extra generous, please leave us a review on Apple and Spotify podcasts.